For centuries, Russia has shaped borders and cultures across Europe and Asia. Its economic influence and political reach during the 20th century changed the world. Here's the story of a powerful nation long oppressed from within. The Nation Parade presents The History of Russia. Russia is the largest country in the world by area. Located in North Asia, it stretches across 11 time zones and reaches from deep in the Arctic Circle to the Black Sea. The capital, Moscow, is the largest city, followed by St. Petersburg and Novosibirsk. Russian is the official language. The current Russian Federation emerged from the collapsing Soviet Union in 1991, but the original Russian nation dates back more than 700 years. Russia's beginnings are rooted in the region north of the Black Sea. In the 700s AD, a network of Finnish and Slavic settlements stretched along the Dwina and Dnieper rivers. As centuries passed, a people known as the Rus gained control of the area. Centered in the cities of Kiev and Novgorod, the Rus built trade routes that eventually reached the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantines were a remnant of the Holy Roman Empire, but based in Constantinople, not Rome. In the late 900s AD, the Rusian leader Volodymyr I embraced the Orthodox Christianity of the Byzantines for himself and his people. This improved political relations with his powerful neighbor, the Byzantine Empire. Giving himself the title of Grand Prince, Volodymyr consolidated the fragmented region into a single state based in Kiev. Volodymyr's descendants could not keep the Kievan Rus united. By the mid-13th century, they had degraded into warring tribes. These were no match for the fierce horsemen from Mongolia sweeping across Central Asia. In 1240, Genghis Khan's grandson invaded the region and razed Kiev. Rusian refugees fled north to the forests around the Moskva River to escape the slaughter. The entire region fell under the control of the Tatars, a Turkic people allied with the Mongols. For 200 years, this occupation by an Eastern power isolated the region from the social and cultural advances in Western Europe. The Rusians missed much of the Renaissance and the Protestant Reformation, but they were well trained in the brutal discipline of their Tatar rulers. Tatars administered their domain through local nobility. The Rusian princes collected taxes and enforced the law on behalf of their rulers. By 1480, Tatar control was so weak that Moscow's leader, Ivan III, refused to pay tribute. Ivan took sole control of his kingdom, known as Muscovy. By this time, the Christian Byzantines had fallen to the Muslim Turks of the Ottoman Empire. Ivan declared Muscovy to be the successor of the Roman Empire. He embraced the old Roman political system of Caesaropapism, which made him, as emperor, the sole authority in all things political, religious, and social. Ivan began using the title of Tsar, which was Rusian for Caesar. A series of aggressive rulers expanded Muscovy through conquest, colonization, and forced migration. But with so many cultures and ethnicities within its borders, the nation constantly risked disintegrating into its component tribes. And with few natural geographic barriers, Muscovy faced invasion on several fronts. Around the turn of the 17th century, a succession crisis coincided with a devastating famine and invasions by the kingdoms of Poland and Sweden. Amid the post-war wreckage, an assembly of clergy, nobles, and townspeople selected a new emperor. Michael Romanov, a distant relation to the old royal line, who was only 16 years old at his coronation. His reign began the Romanov dynasty, which would last for 300 years. A century after Michael's rule, the Rusian Tsar, known as Peter the Great, changed the course of the nation. After living for a time in Europe, Peter recognized the backwardness of his country compared to Western nations. he returned home committed to advancing the nation socially and technologically. He reshaped local and national government, religion, the military, the economy, and academic institutions. To generate funds for development, he laid punishing taxes on the peasants and made high demands of the merchants and upper classes. Peter's dramatic and often ruthless reforms turned the nation into a regional power with European influence. He built a new capital city, St. Petersburg, from territory the army had won from Sweden in the Great Northern War. With this move away from Moscow, the former Tsardom of Muscovy completed its decades-long transformation to become the Russian Empire, known as Russia by the West. Despite the political wins generated by the American and French revolutions, Russia remained an autocracy where a single leader has absolute power. Russian emperors held total authority over the civil rights, freedom, property, and lives of their subjects. Peter the Great and later Empress Catherine the Great grew Russia's boundaries through war and diplomacy. The empire expanded into the territory of modern-day Poland, Lithuania, and Ukraine, and captured land from the Ottoman Empire. Land was the currency of the wealthy. The emperors paid nobles by granting them estates. Large numbers of peasants were assigned to these estates as laborers. Known as serfs, these workers were basically slaves. They were bought and sold between the nobility and not permitted to move away. By the start of the 19th century, Russian nobility had gained new freedoms. They could travel abroad, control their own businesses, and own their estates outright. Through travel and education, the nobility witnessed firsthand the free societies blossoming in the West. They desired the same for Russia. In December 1825, a few military officers staged a coup to replace the autocracy with a more representative government. The revolt was quickly put down, but these rebellious aristocrats, later known as the Decembrists, became role models for the revolutionaries who followed. After the failed coup, the government actively stifled revolutionary tendencies. They restricted foreign travel and academic freedom. A large secret police force imposed widespread censorship. In the 1860s, Tsar Alexander II introduced some reforms. He freed the serfs and granted a limited form of local self-government. But Russia's nobility feared that too much independence would lead to the disintegration of the empire. Poland, Ukraine, and other regions were already trying to separate. When Alexander II was assassinated by revolutionaries, the government cracked down on dissent and rolled back some of his reforms. It was in this environment that the political philosophy of communism took root. In short, communists wanted to replace the autocracy with a classless system where all citizens contributed and benefited equally. This philosophy was popular among the so-called intelligentsia. These were educated people, open to new ideas. They respected Western-style governments and despised the class injustices of the Russian system. And they wanted change. By late 1905, Russia was gripped by chaos. Strikes, riots, assassinations, massacres, terrorism. To ease the conflict, Tsar Nicholas II established a hybrid government. He continued to rule, but permitted the election of a representative legislature called the Duma. Of the many political parties within the Duma, only the extreme right wanted to retain the autocracy. The moderates wanted to transition away from Tsarism toward democracy. Many on the political left wanted to move gradually into democracy, then socialism, and eventually into communism. The extreme left, known as Bolsheviks, wanted to drive the country straight into communism, skipping the middle stages. They were backed by the peasants, who saw communism as the path to immediate relief from their poverty. The extremists on the right and left had no patience for the slow pace of representative government. Militant opposition groups and the government murdered thousands. Political opponents, government employees, and private citizens. to force their agendas by fear and terrorism. In 1914, treaty obligations pulled Russia into World War I against Germany. Along with millions of war casualties, Russian citizens faced food shortages, mass unemployment, and extreme poverty. Facing a popular revolution, Emperor Nicholas II abdicated his throne in March 1917. A provisional or temporary government tried to fill the vacuum. Seeing Russia's turmoil, its enemy, Germany, sought to remove Russia as a factor in the war. Germany sent an exiled Bolshevik and 20 communist revolutionaries into the unstable nation. Germany hoped this outspoken radical, Vladimir Ulyanov, would sow chaos. Ulyanov, better known by his pen name Lenin, did just that. Russia's provisional government felt obligated to support its wartime allies. Russian citizens did not. Military units refused to fight, and many soldiers deserted. The economy was collapsing beneath rising inflation, dropping wages, food shortages, and worker strikes. Lenin saw this unrest as the prologue to world revolution. His propaganda machine radicalized the peasant masses who were suffering the most. In the spring of 1917, Lenin led the Bolshevik overthrow of the government and made Moscow the new capital. Russia withdrew from the war. Bolsheviks executed Emperor Nicholas and his family to ensure no descendant could reclaim the throne. Under Lenin's leadership, the Bolshevik government seized all land and gave it to the peasants. This was done haphazardly, without planning, foresight, or fairness. Freedoms of speech, the press, and association were restricted. Political opposition was outlawed. To promote atheism, religious leaders were deported or executed by the hundreds. The government seized farms, banks, and factories, and then replaced the owners, managers, engineers, and other experts with workers and peasants. In these untrained hands, industry ground to a halt. The economy collapsed. The government executed hundreds of thousands of civilians without trial to stifle growing unrest. Civil war broke out. Millions starved to death. Millions more fled the country, but the terror followed them. The Bolsheviks had rebuilt the military as a political weapon. The renamed Red Army drove west and south to force communism onto Europe. Ukraine, Belarusia, Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Turkestan were absorbed. More would follow in the coming years. These nations were recast as socialist republics, members of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or USSR. Lenin appointed Joseph Stalin to the bureaucratic role of Secretary General of the Communist Party. Stalin turned it into a powerful position. He gave people jobs based on their loyalty to himself, not to the party or nation. He sidelined rivals and those who would not cooperate. After Lenin died, Stalin took control. Stalin wanted the Soviet Union to compete economically with capitalist nations. He fixated on rapid industrialization of the mostly rural nation. He confiscated the land the Bolsheviks had given to the peasants, but then he forced them to keep working on it for little to no money. He implemented collectivization, where government controlled agriculture and manufacturing. But instead of feeding his people, Stalin sold the harvests for foreign currency to fund further industrialization. Stalin's haphazard policies created massive shortages in food and goods. Millions starved to death. As Stalin's power grew, he eliminated every spark of opposition inside and then outside the government. What began as targeted arrests and assassinations evolved into a national horror known as the Purges. Millions of people were killed. Those not executed were deported to concentration camps in Siberia and Central Asia, there to freeze or starve or be worked to death. After culling his government, Stalin turned against the Red Army. Then he purged his security services. Before World War II even began, Stalin had killed more than 5 million of his own citizens. Stalin ignored numerous warnings from his allies, enemies, and his own intelligence services about Germany's leader, Adolf Hitler. In 1939, Russia signed a non-aggression pact with Germany. Stalin then invaded Finland and some socialist republics to secure Germany's eastern flank. These hard-fought wars cost Russia 200,000 casualties. Germany then invaded Russia in June 1941. Hitler expected to conquer Moscow by October of that year. An early winter and a tenacious Russian defense stalled their advance. The Germans tried again the next year, but Russian resistance held. By the end of 1943, the Nazis were in retreat. Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union, known as Operation Barbarossa, was the largest, bloodiest military campaign in the history of the world. Including civilians, more than 25 million people were killed. In 1944, with the United States and England attacking Germany from the west, the Soviet conquest of Eastern Europe began. Every country in Russia's path toward Germany fell to the Red Army. The Soviets installed socialist governments that were largely obedient to the USSR. Stalin then tried for Finland, Greece, Turkey, Iran, Manchuria, and Korea with mixed success. He deported the newly conquered people to Central Asia and Siberia. Because of the war, Russian soldiers and citizens saw what the outside world was like. Even life in conquered Germany under the Western nations was better than life in victorious Russia. To silence such discontent, Stalin launched a new round of purges across the Soviet Union and its new satellite states. Stalin's unexpected death in 1949 created a power vacuum. His eventual successor, Nikita Khrushchev, attempted to separate the government from Stalin's cult of personality. He admitted Stalin's excesses, but insisted that communism was sound. Khrushchev rebuilt the Soviet economy and advanced its reputation as a world superpower. For the first time, the general population of Russia experienced a dramatic improvement in their standard of living. The socialist Soviet Union challenged the capitalist United States in economics and science, and in proxy wars fought across the globe. But failed military gambles in Germany and Cuba, troubles with communist China, and poor agricultural performance weakened Khrushchev's power. He was removed by communist hardliners in 1964. Following Khrushchev, the Soviet government expanded its control over all aspects of life. A stultifying bureaucracy blunted the culture, politics, and innovation. Corruption flourished. Repression became systematized. Ethnic minorities were singled out as threats to the state. Restless satellite countries were menaced with invasion. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. They wanted the country's natural resources and influence over the global trade routes in the Persian Gulf and Indian Ocean. The Soviets killed about 9% of the entire Afghani population and deported around 5 million more. They also wasted colossal sums of their own money, men, and equipment for nearly a decade, with little to show for it in the end. Mikhail Gorbachev came to power in 1985, promoting two new approaches to Soviet governance. Perestroika, or Reconstruction, was intended to strengthen the stagnating Soviet economy. Glasnost, or openness, allowed honest analysis of failed systems. Before, no one was allowed to critique the government. Glasnost promised not to punish people for telling the truth. This openness triggered the downfall of the Soviet power structure. The true conditions of the USSR were revealed to its citizens and the world without the filter of government lies. Russians could travel abroad and see for themselves the stark differences in living standards. Dissidents gained a voice in the new openness. They opposed the political and cultural oppression of their countries. Now their public discontent could reach like-minded audiences who united to push back against Soviet control. In the late 1980s, the Soviet Union began to break apart. Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia demanded more independence from the Soviet Union. Gorbachev allowed open elections for local, low-level positions. It didn't help. Even Russia elected its own president, Boris Yeltsin, but remained under Soviet control. In 1991, several Soviet countries were about to sign a new treaty that granted them more sovereignty. Communist hardliners led a coup against Gorbachev to derail the treaty. Fearing assassination, Russian President Yeltsin barricaded himself in his office. He called for Russian citizens to rise up and protect the motherland. Mass demonstrations flooded the streets. The coup failed. Yeltsin survived. Gorbachev also survived the coup, but the Soviet Union did not. Without centralized control, the individual nations became fully independent or fell into civil war. The Red Army dissolved as troops refused to report for service. Military equipment was seized by local governments or sold for personal gain. Russia, now on its own, faced economic collapse. Corrupt insiders drained the national coffers. Tens of billions of rubles simply disappeared from government accounts. Raw material wealth, valued at tens of billions more, also went missing. Inflation and prices skyrocketed. Organized crime surged. The politically connected became impossibly wealthy, while people went hungry. Russia struggled during the next decade, economically and politically. In 1999, nearly a decade after the Soviet collapse, Russia's President Yeltsin resigned. His chosen successor was Vladimir Putin. The nation's economy improved steadily under Putin's leadership, but rising crime, staggering corruption, and demoralizing terror attacks defined his first decade in office. Putin wanted to restore Russia's standing as a world power, but the country seemed to be disintegrating into ethnic components, all battling each other. In 2014, Russia suddenly invaded the Crimea region of Ukraine, declaring it part of traditional Russia. Fresh from this success, Putin took a firm hand to the civil freedoms that allowed discontent. He shut down independent media. He labeled dissenters as terrorists and traitors to justify their prosecution. For example, publicly reciting an anti-war poem merited 7 years in prison. A social media post could bring 5 years in prison. Many of those who crossed Putin were killed, regardless of their wealth or political standing. In 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine again, hoping to absorb the rest of the country. The operation failed. Instead of a quick, tidy victory, Putin plunged both countries into years of war. During the years-long Soviet invasion of Afghanistan during the 1970s and 80s, Russia lost about 14,000 soldiers killed with 50,000 injured. In the current Ukraine conflict, Russia loses that many soldiers every month. More than 1 million Russians have been killed or wounded in Putin's military meat grinder. But as Russian leaders have known for centuries, there is a nearly endless supply of civilians available to be sacrificed. In 2026, Russia is alienated from much of the world and beset by stiff economic sanctions. 1 million citizens have fled the country to avoid conscription, draining the country of young, educated professionals. The resilient Russians now slog through yet another era of corruption and violence. They labor under yet another autocrat who insists the world is attacking simply because they hate Russians. So this vast, diverse population believes they must stay united and support the state to survive. Check the credits for a list of sources to learn more about Russia. Watch the Nation Parade's shorter videos about Russia. They answer questions about communism, Stalin's purges, the invasions of Ukraine, and more. If you found this video helpful and informative, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the Nation Parade to make your world a little bigger.